Hello everyone, let me move this tripod. Alright, we are going to read the Ponder Heart, pick up there. We are reading 6. I don't say chapter 1, chapter 2, because the book is kind of divided in chapters, but it doesn't say like chapter 1, chapter 2. It just has pictures, just little sketches between, I guess, what's supposed to be the chapters. And then, like, there may be one of them or two of them that are really long. So I just read for a certain amount of time, so long, and then I'll stop. So let's go ahead and pick up. If you remember, the last that I read was about Bonnie D was dead, and Uncle Daniel has been charged. They've arrested him, and he has been charged with her death. It said they charged him with murder. So let's read on. We will see how exactly she died. Let me get a little situated here, okay? All right. So last week it came up on the docket. It hadn't been anything much of a docket before that, and they shoved a few things out of the way for it. Old Judge Waite was sitting on the case. Judge Chip Clanahan is not really a judge. What he is a splendid lawyer and our best friend, even if he is 1,000 years old and can't really see where he's going. But lo and behold, Judge Chip told me just before we got off to the start, he had to let DeYancey, his grandson, argue Uncle Daniel's case because he never realized how his strength was leaving him, and he had to go to Hot Springs. I was always partial to Daniel, but I'm getting too old for him now, he says. I got to go to Hot Springs tomorrow. I knew Grandpa was turning in his grave. Go out of town, I says. You think I'm going to forgive you for it when you get back? He gives me a little pinch. The day I don't rate a pinch of some kind from a Clanahan, I'll know I'm past redemption and an old maid. Nowadays, if some man just pinched a woman, if he knew her or not, he would get in trouble, wouldn't he? Tells you how times have changed. Uncle Daniel has always considered DeYancey one of his best friends and was always partial to him until this happened. DeYancey came out and announced that Uncle Daniel wasn't going to open his mouth at his own trial. Not at all, not a word. The trial was going to proceed without him. It wouldn't be like this. I was to testify about what happened. That's very important. Dr. Eubanks was to testify from the medical point of view, and a few other odds and ends. But Uncle Daniel, the main one, was just supposed to sit there and be good and not say anything at all, and he felt left out. He didn't understand a bit. It was so unlikely. Why, he loves the limelight. Everybody in town was indignant with DeYancey when they heard. More than one member of our congregation baked and sent Uncle Daniel his favorite cake, banana, and a never-fail devil's food cake came from the Clanahans the day Judge Tip went off. Miss Tea Cake sent a beautiful Prince of Wales cake in black and white stripes, her specialty, but I couldn't help thinking of convicts when I sliced it. You know what? I've never heard of a Prince of Wales cake. If any of you have, just let me know. I'm going to have to look that one up. The bank sent a freezer of peach ice cream from their own peaches, beautifully turned and packed. Uncle Daniel got the idea things must be more momentous than he thought, and he couldn't let a soul get near enough to him for him to do any talking beforehand. That was the hardest part. Of course, they hadn't done anything about Uncle Daniel. He didn't have to go anywhere. They knew where he was, with me. They're letting you roam, says DeYancey to Uncle Daniel. Roam? says he. Now, that isn't anything for you to worry about, says Deyancy. Just means they can count on you for coming. As if they could keep him away. But Deyancy Clanahan was here roaming around with him. I never saw the like. He was his shadow. He said, "Come on in the dining room, Daniel. I want to practice you not talking." That was easier in the dining room than anywhere else. But it wouldn't be clear sailing anywhere. Uncle Daniel couldn't bear to hear what Deyancy was saying. That was always the trouble. He managed to keep up his appetite anyway. When the day came, he was up with the sun as usual and looking pretty cheerful at breakfast. He had on his new white Sunday suit and white shirt with the baby blue pinstripe in it, and snow-white shoes and his Sunday tie. He set out when breakfast was over and got a fresh haircut at the barber shop and came back looking fat and fine to me, with a little Else Polson rose in his lapel. Well, the town was jam-packed. Everybody and his brother was on hand, on account of Uncle Daniel's general popularity, and then people not knowing the Ponders but knowing of them are just about everywhere you'd look. It was a grand day, hot, but with that little breeze blowing that we get from the south. Uncle Daniel and I get there either early or late, but just on time. Let me read that again. Uncle Daniel and I didn't get there either early or late, but just on time, and Uncle Daniel had to speak to a world of people, but just hello. He was delighted at where our seats were saved inside the railing. That was the furthest down front he'd ever sat anywhere. I kept my gloves on and shook open my Japanese fan and just fanned. Of course, inside the courthouse was hot, and one ceiling fan sticks, and the peacocks come into town and crowding their way in behind us made the courtroom a good deal hotter. They came in a body. I didn't count either time, but I think there were more peacocks, if possible, at the trial than at the funeral. I imagine all Polk was there with them. There were people we'd never laid eyes on before in our lives. The immediate Peacock family had paraded into town in Uncle Daniel's pickup truck that he had sent them, as pretty as you please. To see them in Polk was bad enough, but you ought to see them in Clay country, and surprised to death at where they found themselves. I bet you a nickel, even if they were the ones started this. We saw them come in. I turned right around and looked. Old Lady Peacock wagged in first, big as the house, and new bedroom slippers this time, with pom-poms on the toes. She had all of them behind her, girls going down in stair steps looking funnier and funnier in Bonnie D's parceled out clothes, and boys all ages and sizes, and the grown ones with wives and children, and Old Man Peacock bringing up the rear. I didn't remember him at all, but there he was, carrying the lunch. He had a face as red as a tom turkey, and not one tooth to his name. But he had on some new pants. I noticed the tack still poking out the seam when he creaked in at the door. They're not dying out. Took up the first 2 rows with some sitting on laps. And I think it was their dog barked so incessantly at all the dogs in town from the courthouse porch. Now that the boys weren't bawling, they sat there with their mouths wide open. The biggest one's babies just wore their little didies to court, one of them with a brand new double holster around on top, about to fall off. Couldn't a one of them talk, and of course there was eternal jumping up from the peacocks to get water. Our drinking fountain in the courthouse quit working years ago, so it's heaped up with concrete to cover the spout and rounded off and painted blue, our sheriff's wife's idea. And you have to know where to go if you're honestly thirsty. Uncle Daniel spoke to the peacocks, but then I saw his face light up. like it only does for a newcomer in his life, and in sailed that lawyer, Doris R. Gladney. Long, black, buzzardy coat, black suspenders, beaky nose, and on his little finger a diamond bigger than mine, but not half as expensive. Walked too low and got up and sat down too fast, like all the Gladneys. We all know people who are in a terrible hurry about something. And I understand Mr. Gladney had been peppered with buckshot on several occasions in the course of his career. Shows you what kind of people he's thrown with. He had rushed up and down the room several times to show he had come, and patted the little peacocks on the head, but they didn't smile an inch. Then in came de Yancey, real pale, and he patted Uncle Daniel, and he smiled. And all around us, everybody in the courtroom was talking 90 to nothing when old Judge Waite brought down the gavel and the whole conglomeration sat up. The other side was first. Mr. Truex Bodkin came on to the start, was led on, rather, he's blind. He's the coroner. Heart failure, he said. Natural causes. Other than natural causes. Could be. That's what I meant. Could have been other than natural causes. This is the case of the state versus Daniel Ponder we're on today, says the judge. Put your mind to your work. Suppose I acted that way. Poor old blind Truex is let back. And do you know who was called next? Nobody you'd ever heard of in 1,000 years. Would you guess that after all that had been done for him, Uncle Daniel had taken it on himself to send Bonnie D. his own message? That same Saturday I stopped the money, he did it. By word of mouth, of course, and he picked out the slowest, oldest, dirtiest, most brainless old Negro man he could find to send it by. I thought it showed a little ingratitude. It was Big John. Worked for us out there since time was. I don't know what he did. Always wore the same hat and shoes and overalls, and couldn't sign his name if his life depended. Old man lives off by himself away, way back on the place. Wonder how far anybody would have to go to find him. I never saw where he lived. First, Uncle Daniel had to send a little Negro from the barber shop to get the old one to come in and learn the message. Whole thing took all day. All the money Big John's ever made is right on him now in his overall pocket. If somebody hasn't taken it again, that's all he wants it for, to carry it around. I expect he's been robbed 100 times among the Negroes, but he'll always ask you for money any time he sees you. Of course, he and Uncle Daniel get along fine. He used to work in the flowers, if you could keep him out of the beds. Dug holes for Grandma. That's what she did with Big John. So here he was, around his hat in a bunch of full-blown roses, 5 or 6 etoiles in a row. And I may not be saying that right, I don't know. Some of these roses I've never heard of. So maybe some of y'all have. With little short stems stuck down in the hat band. They're still growing in Grandma's garden in spite of everything. Did Mr. Daniel Ponder send word by you to his wife, Miss Bonnie D. Ponder, on the 14th day of June of this year? Is what old Gladney asked him. Big John agrees with you every time. He nods his head, and the roses bow up and down. Now, I can tell you're a reliable Negro, says old Gladney, and I just want you to tell me what the message was. What did Mr. Daniel tell you to say to the lady? Big John has a little voice like a whistle. The air won't come through just right. Go tell Miss Bonnie D. Go tell Miss Bonnie D. He's getting started. Keep on. Tell Miss Bonnie D. what? Big John fixed his mouth and recited it off. I'm going to kill you dead, Miss Bonnie D, if you don't take 'em back. If you don't take me back, I think it's supposed to be me. I'm going to kill you dead, Miss Bonnie D, if you don't take me back. I would have thought Big John would get the message wrong to begin with. That's one reason I'd never have picked him. But there was no mistaking that. He got Uncle Daniel's right. Old Man Gladney says after him real soft, I'm going to kill you dead, Miss Bonnie D. Did he laugh, I wonder, when he said that? De Yancey took objection to that, but Big John didn't even know what laugh was. He just scratched his head up under his hat. What made you remember it so good, Uncle? Big John still only scratched his head. Finally he says, 'Cause Mr. Daniel give me a dime. That was all he could think of, but I knew it was because of that high esteem Big John held Uncle Daniel in. That made him remember so fine. I must say Uncle Daniel held esteem for Big John, too. He always did like him because of the money he could deposit on him. Then he didn't mind old dirty people the way you and I did. He let Big John come around him and listen to what he said, both. They listened to each other. When you saw them walking white and black together over the back lot, you'd have thought there went two moguls looking over the world. And what word did Miss Bonnie D send back, says old Gladney. But Big John could remember that about as well as the frizzly hen that comes up to the back door. Her didn't have nothing to give me, was the best he could do. But Mr. Daniel Ponder did send this message to Miss Bonnie D. Peacock Ponder, paying you for its safe delivery, Uncle, only 2 short days before her death. I'm going to kill you dead if you don't take me back, didn't he? Ain't said to me, to her, Big John whistled out. Ain't said to me that time. I ain't done nothing, only but what he tell me. That's right. I'm going to kill you dead, Miss Bonnie D. And now he's done it, says old Gladney sharp. And no matter how De Yancey's objecting, Big John's agreeing like everything, bobbing his head with those flowers on it under everybody's nose. De Yancey doesn't want to ask him anything, makes a sign like he's brushing flies away. Well, go on, Uncle, I'm through with you, says Gladney. He won't go away if you don't give him a nickel, I says from my seat. What for, says old Gladney, but fork's over and the old man goes off real pleased. I must say the whole courtroom smelled of Big John and his flower garden for a good time afterward. I think as a witness, Mr. Gladney, Big John Beach was worth every bit of that, says De Yancey. But Uncle Daniel looked to me like his feelings were already hurt. Big John up there instead of him. Well, of course I hit it, but I was surprised myself at a few who were chosen as witnesses. Here rose up somebody I'd never expect to see testifying in 1,000 years, Miss Tea-Cake McGee. Old Gladney begins to tackle her. Mrs. McGee, you were married to the defendant, Mr. Daniel Ponder, for 2 months in the year 1944, were you not? Miss Tea-Cake had cut bangs and was putting on that she could barely whisper. The judge had to tell her to speak up so people could hear. And divorced? You couldn't hear a thing. Why were you divorced, may I ask? Says old Gladney cheerful like. I just had to let him go, whispers Miss Tea-Cake. That's just what she always says. Would you care to describe any features of your wedded life? Asked old Gladney, and squint like he's taking Miss Tea-Cake's picture there with her mouth open. Just a minute, says the judge. Miss Edna Earle's girl is standing in the door to find out how many for dinner. I'll ask for a show of hands, and puts up his first. It was a table full, I can tell you. Everybody but the Peacocks, it appeared to me. I made a little sign to Ada's sister she'd better kill a few more hens. Then Gladney gives a long look at the jury and says, "Never mind, Mrs. McGee. We understand perfectly. You'd rather keep it to yourself that you are harboring a booger man. I won't ask you for another word about it." Miss Teacake's still looking at him pop-eyed. Old Gladney backs away on her easy, and Yancey hops over and says, "Miss Teacake, just one question will clear this up for us and you both, I think. In the period of this, your second marriage, did you ever at any time have cause to fear the defendant? Were you scared of Daniel, in other words?" "Listen here. I don't scare that easy, Yancey Clanahan," says Miss Teacake in her everyday voice. They tell her just to answer the question. All she says is, "Ever since I lost Professor McGee, I've had to look after myself." She keeps a pistol by her bed, and for all I know, it's loaded. "But you did ask Mr. Ponder to go. Would anything ever induce you to ask him to come back?" says old Gladney, pointing a finger, and she hoots out "No," and scares herself. But by that time, they're through with her. She was mighty dressed up for that 5 minutes. Had a black silk fan she never did get worked open, very different from appearing in church, appearing in a court trial. She said afterwards she had no idea when she was asked to testify that it might be for the other side. And here next came Narcissus, her whole life spent with the Ponders, and now grinning from ear to ear, and she had that little black dog of hers with her. She didn't know any better than let him come, so there he trotted. And her black umbrella she came to town under was folded up and swinging by her skirt. "Woman, were you working in the Ponder house on the day of which we speak, Monday afternoon, the 16th of June, says old Gladney. "Just let me take off my shades," says Narcissus. In town she wears black glasses with white rims. She folds them in a case that's a celluloid butterfly from Woolworth's and says she was there Monday. He asked her what she was doing the last thing she did for Mrs. Ponder, and when she got around to that answer, she said, "Drag an old parlor sofa towards the middle of the room like she told me." "What for?" "Sir, lightning was fixing to come into windows, getting out the way." "Was Mrs. Ponder there in the parlor with you, woman?" "She riding the sofa." All the peacocks laughed in court. They didn't mind hearing how lazy they were. "Was Mrs. Ponder expecting company?" That's how come I ironed her apricot dress, all them little pleats." "And company came?" Narcissus looked around at me and slapped her leg. "Who was it? Tell who you saw." Narcissus took him down by telling him she didn't see, but it was us. She ran out of the room first, but she had ears. They let her tell just what she heard then. Narcissus says, "Here's the car Miss Edna Earl ride around and go oomph, coming to a stop by the tree. Here's Mr. Daniel's voice sound off in a happy time way, saying Miss Bonnie D was sure right about the rain. Here's it raining, lightning, and thundering, feet pacing over the yard, and little dog barking at Miss Edna Earl 'cause she didn't bring him a sack of bones." "So you could say who the company was," says old Gladney. And Narcissus says, "Wasn't no spooks." But Judge Waite wouldn't let her count that, either question or answer. "Did Mrs. Ponder herself have a remark to make?" says old Gladney. "Says, here they come, glad to see anybody. If it gets anybody, hope it gets them, not me." Uncle Daniel turned around to me with his face all worked in an O. He always thought whatever Bonnie D opened her mouth and said was priceless. He recognized her from that. I said to him. Keep on, says old Gladney to Narcissus. Can't keep on, it's gone by then. But you do know this much. At the time you left the parlor and heard the company coming across the yard and talking, Mrs. Ponder was alive. Narcissus gave him the most taken down look she knows. Alive as you is now. And when you saw Mrs. Ponder next, storm passed over, says Narcissus. I goes into parlor and asked, did I hear my name? And there Mr. Daniel and Miss Edna Earl holding together. And there her, stretched out all them little pleats to do over, feet pointing the other way around, and Dr. Lubank snapping down her eyes. Dead, hollers Gladney, waving his hand like he had a flag in it. Uncle Daniel raised his eyes and kept watching that flag. And don't that prove, Narcissus, the company had something to do with it? Had everything to do with it. Mr. Daniel Ponder like Othello of old, and he suffocated to death that beautiful, young, innocent 98-pound bride of his out of a fit of pure jealousy from the well springs of his age and heart. Narcissus' little dog was barking at him, and De Yancey was objecting just as hard. But Narcissus plain talks back to him. What's that you say, woman? Yells old Gladney because he was through with her. Says, no, sir. Don't know he, but Mr. Daniel didn't do nothing like that. His heart ain't grow old neither by a long shot. What do you mean, old woman? Yells old Gladney, and comes up and leans over her. Means you ain't brought up Mr. Daniel, and I has. Find you somebody else, says Narcissus. Gladney says something about that's what the other side had better try to do. He says that's just what he means, and there wasn't anybody else, since nobody would suspect Miss Edna Earl Ponder of anything, but he stamps away from Narcissus like she had just cheated him fine. Up jumps De Yancey in his place and says, Narcissus, at the time you heard company running across the yard, there was a storm breaking loose, was there not? Yes, sir. All right, tell me, what was the reason you only stayed to hear the company, not see them, your best friends on earth? When they came in all wet and wanting to be brushed off, where were you? Ho, I's in the back bedroom under the bed, says Narcissus. Miss Edna Earl's old room. Doing what? Hiding. I don't want to get no lightning bolts down me. Come lightning and thunder. Mr. De Yancey, you always going to find me clear back under the furthest part of the bed in the furthest most back room, and ain't coming out till it's over. The same as ever, says De Yancey, and he smiles. Now tell me this. What was Bonnie D herself generally doing when there was such a thunderstorm? Me and Miss Bonnie D, we generally gets down together. Us hides together under Miss Edna Earl's bed when it storms. Another thing we does together, Mr. De Yancey, I occasionally plays jacks with her, says Narcissus, soon as I gets my kitchen swept out. And at first Miss Bonnie D just couldn't stand Negroes, and I like her nerve where she hid. But that Monday, says De Yancey, that Monday she didn't get down under anything. She pleading company, so we just gets the sofa moved away from the lightning best we can. I be's all by myself under the bed listening to that. Narcissus all at once dies laughing. So you can't know what happened right afterward. Sir, I just be telling you what happened, says Narcissus. Boom, boom, rackety rack. Narcissus laughs again, and the little dog barks with her. Narcissus, open your eyes, both of them. And De Yancey gave a whistle. Here came two little balkan boys, red as beets, wearing their scout uniforms and dragging something together down the aisle. De Yancey, what is that thing? Asked Judge Waite from the bench. Just part of a tree, says De Yancey. Here's a modest boy. I don't think it had been cut more than 15 minutes. You know what tree that is, he says to Narcissus. Know that fig tree other side of Jericho, says Narcissus. It's ours. Something specially big and loud did happen, Narcissus. The minute after you ran under the bed, didn't it? De Yancey shakes the tree real soft and says, Your Honor, I would like to enter as evidence the top 4-foot section of the little blue fig tree the Ponders have always had in their yard, known to all, standing about 10 feet away from the chimney of the house, that was struck by a bolt of lightning on Monday afternoon, June the 16th, before the defendant and his niece ever got in the house good. Had they gone in the side door, they would very likely not be with us now. In a moment, I'll lay this before you, Your Honor, and the jury. Please to pass it. Look at the lightning marks and the withered leaves and pass it quietly to your neighbor. I submit that it was the racket this little blue fig tree made being struck, and the blinding flash of it just 10 short feet from the walls of the Ponder house that caused the heart of Miss Bonnie D. Peacock Ponder to fail in her bosom. This is the racket you heard, Narcissus. I told you to open your eyes. Narcissus opened her eyes and shut them again. It was the worst-looking old piece of tree you ever saw. It looked like something had skinned down it with claws out. The Yancey switched it back and forth, shh, shh, under Narcissus' nose, and all at once she opened her mouth, but not her eyes, and said, Storm come closer and closer. Closer and closer, till a big ball of fire come sidling down the air and hit right yonder. She pointed without looking right under Yancey's feet. You couldn't tell it pretty. I feels it clacking my teeth and twanging my bones, nipping my heels. Then I couldn't no more hear and couldn't no more see, just smelled 'em smokes. Then far away comes first little sound. It comes louder and louder till it turned to little black dog whining and pulled me out from under the bed. She pointed at the dog without looking, and he wagged his tail at her. Then Narcissus opened her eyes and laughs and shouts, Yes, that's what get her. You hit it. And all of a sudden, she sets her glasses back on and quits her laughing, and you can't see a thing more of her but stove black. All I can say is that was news to me. And then you heard the company at the door, says de Yancey, and they just nodded each other. Old Gladney's right there and says, Woman, are you prepared to swear on the Holy Scripture here that you know which one came in that house first, those white folks or that ball of fire? I ain't got nothing to do with it, says Narcissus, which come in first. If white folks and a ball of fire both try and get in y'all's house, you best let them mind who coming in first. I ain't had nothing to do with it. I under the bed in Miss Edna Earl's old room. She just washed her hands of us. You can't count on them for a single minute. Old Gladney threw his hands in the air, but so did Yancey. Come on, Sport, says Narcissus, and she and Sport come on back up the aisle and stand at the back for the rest of it. So about all old Gladney could do was holler a little. I'll skip over that and say the prosecution rest. That looked like the best they could do for the time being. All right, we're going to stop there. So I hope you're enjoying it so far. And as I said before, you can look, and there's a movie. It may be on YouTube. I'll check that out. And if there is, I will. I'll put the link when we're done reading, or you can go ahead and look for it. So I hope you're enjoying it so far. So I will see you next week with the next reading. Okay, y'all have a good evening.